think we still have participants coming on. Good evening, everyone. My name is Angela Turner Ford. I'm chair of the Mississippi Legislative Black Caucus. And on behalf of the caucus, I'd like to thank you all for joining our call this evening. We know that we have been under a state of emergency since March the 14th of 2020 regarding the coronavirus COVID-19. And shortly thereafter, our schools were closed on March the 19th. And here we are now, almost 3 months to the day. Our educators, State Department of Health professionals, parents, and children are all concerned about the safe return to our schools. Hence, that's why we're here this evening to discuss this very important topic. The Mississippi Legislative Black Caucus has relied upon Mr. Felton Moss to assemble a group of panelists for us. And Mr. Moss is the owner of All Things Equal regarding education. And I'm sure he's going to make sure that we get the correct name of his entity before we get off the call this evening. But all things means all. And Mr. Moss is an educator, a rising star in the state of Mississippi. And we know that he has done an excellent job assembling our guests for us. So Mr. Moss, we're going to allow you to take the lead. Thank you for all that you've done, and we're looking forward to receiving the information that you all will have to share to the caucus, to our constituents regarding the safe reopening of schools amid COVID-19. Mr. Moss.
Thank you, Senator Turner Ford, for the introduction. Again, I'm delighted to be here tonight and leading this conversation, but really excited to hear from our panelists because they have so much to say about the work we're doing. As we wait for folks to log into the call, I'm going to take this opportunity to frame a little bit around why we are here tonight and some of the challenges that we face before we lean into some of the questions. This pandemic, as you know, has presented one of the most serious public health crises, some would argue the most serious public health crisis the world has experienced in generations. As we look forward to the 2021 school year and beyond, we must do everything in our power to safely reopen schools because we believe that doing so is in the best interest of our students. And we know that we have to figure out how to get kids back to school and learning so that they can be productive citizens for Mississippi and our world. But we also recognize that districts need to find a pathway for reopening schools safely with health and well-being of the entire community in mind. And so our panelists come together tonight to really tackle this issue and think deeply about how do we safely return to school. What we also know is that reopening schools really has to be guided by this assumption that a vaccine will not be available for from somewhere between 12 and 18 months. Which means our district leaders need to be able to respond quickly to the circumstances that may arise in their school or in their community or in the US. We are consistently seeing a rise in cases as folks are not following the CDC guidelines, but we really have to think differently about how do we get folks following those guidelines in schools. And even as we plan to reopen campuses in August, we know we may need to close them again with very little advance warning. And that is the unfortunate and harsh reality. And so as we are making these robust plans to open schools with respect to whichever mode schools have selected from the MDE considerations that have been given, we must lead with the notion in mind that we could be asked to depart schools again and have a plan in place for children. So this means districts must be prepared to really toggle between those different learning models designed to fit a variety of circumstances and drivers. One of the things that we have been fortunate enough to receive in our state is our state chief, Dr. Wright, assembled a work group of superintendents from all across this country representing an array of school districts and ways of life and background to really develop considerations for how we reopen schools. And we are so fortunate tonight that many of the individuals, the two of the individuals who served on that superintendent roundtable are joining us for this conversation. That is Dr. Benita Coleman and Dr. Adrian Hammett, who respectfully serve in the Ocean Springs School District and the Jefferson County School District. With respect to the document and the considerations, they identified what appears to be 6 broad areas that's inclusive of a lot of things, but from academic programming to operations to family and community support, developing communication structures, health and safety, technology, learning management systems, all of those things have been thought about deeply by this body, and they've provided considerations to school districts for how they might open them. While the guidance are not a set of requirements or mandates, they are certainly guidance for districts to be able to use. We also know that that same guidance provided schools with 3 models, a traditional schedule, a hybrid schedule, and a virtual schedule as 3 options that schools could consider as they seek to reopen schools. And so tonight's conversation is really going to provide us with an opportunity to lean into some of the pressing questions that folks have submitted to us via email, but also some questions that we've worked on with the Legislative Black Caucus to really be able to push our districts. The caucus is committed to not only advancing policy that supports children having access to a great and excellent education, but also supporting our district leaders with being able to open school at day 1, ready for children with the right procedures and protocols in place. I'm going to begin by introducing our panelists tonight. We have Dr. Carrie Wright, who is our State Superintendent of Education. We are so fortunate to have Dr. Wright. She is my former boss, but if I can say, we have a champion for children in Dr. Wright. Every day, she takes a stack of papers home and sort through everything. I've always been amazed at her leadership, that she takes all of that stuff home and gives everybody feedback the next day so that children can get the education that they deserve. And so we're fortunate to have her in modern history, one of our longest serving state chiefs. In addition to that, she's helped to shepherd in unprecedented growth in reading. We've hit the national stage and folks are wondering, what are we doing getting kids reading and performing math in Mississippi? So we're thankful to have her leadership in Mississippi. We have Dr. Benita Coleman, who is the superintendent of Ocean Springs School District. Dr. Coleman's school district has consistently ranked in the top 10 since her arrival. She's increased dual credit options. She's presently just served as the chairwoman of the committee that was assigned with putting the guidance together to support our school districts. But she has served not only in Mississippi, but in high-performing school districts in other parts of our country, but ultimately returned back to the great state of Mississippi to support our scholars here and has really taken her school district to the top. And so we're excited of having her voice as part of this conversation tonight. We have Dr. Michael Cormack, who serves as the Chief of Staff in Jackson Public School District. Dr. Cormack has a history of being a transformational school leader, having transformed Quitman County Middle School in Marks, Mississippi, and then moving to lead reading initiatives with the Barksdale Reading Institute. And now he's leading the work in Jackson Public Schools to be able to support Dr. Green, the superintendent there, and all the great people in the school district. So we're thankful to have Dr. Michael Cormack with us tonight. We have Dr. Adrian Hammett, who is a recent appointee as superintendent in Jefferson County. He's been there for a short time, has worked there, served as a high school administrator, counselor, has served on Dr. Wright's council focused with the considerations. And so we're excited to have him join us, having been a counselor and thinking about how do we support students socially and emotionally. We think will contribute greatly to tonight's conversation. We have Dr. Hope Crenshaw, who leads Teen Health Mississippi, who has done lots of work to ensure that teens are advocating for healthy options in our state. She's done lots of work around comprehensive sex education and educating students in that regard. And she's been doing some social emotional work lately. And so we're excited to have Dr. Crenshaw join us tonight and bring her expertise from the classroom all the way to leading teen health work. We're really excited to have her join us tonight. We have Mr. Sanford Johnson, who was a high school history teacher who loves history. I had to say that about him. But he currently serves as the executive director of Teach Plus Mississippi. We are really excited about this organization that Mr. Johnson is leading. This organization is bringing teacher leaders across the state together to help advance policy, prior to doing this, he worked on significant policy issues in the legislature, from pre-K to comprehensive sex education, to how we think about school choice in this state. We are really thankful to have Sanford as part of this conversation tonight. And he's always recruiting people to come work in the Delta. He is committed to getting people to work in the Delta. So I wanted to remind him. We have Dr. Lerona Searcy, who is a health professional, who is a public health advocate. If you ever follow her on Facebook, she is always putting public health information out. She is a professor of nursing and public health, and she has lots of credentials. I don't remember all of them, but she has all the credentials, and we're excited for her to lean into this conversation to really advise us and think about how do we safely enter school. And then we will get started. Tonight, we are going to start with our state chief answering our first question, but we'd also ask Dr. Wright if you would like to add anything about the considerations document. Would you please do that? But our first question is, we use the term new normal, but the reality is for many students, lack of access is their normal. This is a tremendous opportunity to better understand the daily experience of those students who do not have access to what they need to be successful. What does that mean for your work as a leader in education? And all of our panelists will answer this question, but we will start with our state chief, Dr. Wright.
All right, thank you, thank you. Appreciate being here too. I want to really just recognize also everybody that's on the group. You certainly recognized Benita and Adrian, who were on the committee that put together the considerations document, but I also want to recognize the others that were on that committee, Todd English, Jason Harris, Tess Smith, Charlotte Seals, Lance Evans, Matt Dillon, and Miskia Davis. So I really appreciated the time. I know how busy superintendents are, but they stepped up to the plate and I think have produced a very, very helpful document. I think for me as a leader, this has been an eye-opening experience. I think it's been a confirmation of what we knew. We knew that there were pockets of our state that did not have access and pockets that did. And quite honestly, I'm on calls with my fellow colleagues, my other state chiefs, twice a week. And this same thing is happening across the nation. It is not just happening in Mississippi. So we took the bull by the horns and have developed what I consider a very comprehensive plan that we put before the legislature and the elected leadership, to ensure that we could basically, this plan will move all children to a one-to-one and all districts to a one-to-one. And so that's how we've approached this. This plan includes a device in every child's hand, a cellular enabled device. We've talked about data plans. There are learning management systems. I know we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but that will enable districts to load then high quality content, which is also part of the plan, onto these devices so children can take them home and literally work with them from home. The last thing that we've added beyond the security and the support, because we've got a lot of that planned for teachers, parents, and community as well as children, is the telehealth and teletherapy part of our plan. We realize that a lot of parents and teachers and staff, quite honestly, are stressed by all of this, and children need access to telehealth in these remote areas, and they also need access to teletherapy. So we are hoping it's a $250 million plan, and we have been working with the legislature on how to fund this plan. And so that is something that we are really, really hoping that this will move, I think, far into the future for the state of Mississippi. We will never be given an opportunity like this. So that's how I took it. As a leader, I took responsibility for saying, how can we ensure that everybody has access to high quality instruction, whether they're in school or out of school?
Thank you so much, Dr. Wright. Dr. Coleman, your turn now.
Sure. I think as a leader, the way we decided to approach this, and of course, everything is from a team perspective, is that we made a commitment as a team that we would not stop teaching and learning once we had to dismiss school. So for us, we knew that if we stopped that process, our children would have 5 months with no instruction. And for us, that was just clearly unacceptable. We really did have to pivot and learn a lot as adults very quickly about not only how to navigate technology, but also how to make sure we were bringing our parents along with us, because we were asking them to do things that they had never had to do before. We saw a lot of opportunities for our teachers to create little, what I call one-room schoolhouses. And so that was a community effort that we were very pleased to see. But for us, it was around the use of the technology that we had in buildings and actually putting that in the hands of our children. So all of those Chromebooks that we had bought for testing, we put those with our families. We didn't keep them. And to be quite honest, I'm very fortunate that my board had made the decision that if we don't get them back, then that's just one of the, I guess, the hazards of us going through this process. But we wanted to make sure education didn't stop. We have also tried to build in synchronous learning opportunities so that students could see their teachers and their teachers would provide that instruction. But we do have some students and families, of course, that don't have Wi-Fi access. And so how we've been able to mitigate that, of course, would be with Wi-Fi hotspots and using other peripherals, but it has really been a sea shift for all of us. And we're continuing to work this summer just to make sure that we have multiple plans in place in August, because none of us actually know what's going to happen. But we do know we don't want to be in the same place that we were March 19th with trying to plan in a vacuum. So we are trying to make sure that we're all prepared.
Awesome, thank you. Sanford, would you lean in a little bit as someone who's leading an advocacy organization? What does this look like for teachers and your leadership at this point?
Thank you so much. So we had the opportunity to send out a survey to 2,400 teachers across the state of Mississippi. And it was interesting to hear from teachers who had some of the same personal experiences that my wife and I had trying to work and parent at the same time. And I think one of the things we learned is that it is nearly impossible to do both simultaneously. There were a couple of times during the day, okay, I'm gonna go hard and being a parent right now and work is just gonna have to wait, or I really need to get this done. And I hope that the bread and the lunch meat is within reach of my two girls. So we had those challenges and trying to get them to do all the work that they were supposed to do. And we realized that we were the lucky ones. When you look at a lot of families across the state of Mississippi, if you don't have the same income that you had before the pandemic, if you don't have access to internet, if you don't have access to devices, or if you may have access to a device, but that one child has to share that device with two siblings or parents, there could be some major challenges. So those are some of the things that we picked up from our survey. We found out that there are major gaps across the state around access to internet and devices. We also learned that students, at least the teachers reported to us that when students go back to school, whenever they go back to school, there are going to be some major challenges that we're going to have to address. There are going to be academic challenges because of the learning loss. There's going to be a major gap between the students who had access to high quality instruction and those who simply didn't have that access. There are also going to be challenges related to social, emotional, and even mental health challenges. You gotta remember that certain students are dealing with the direct impact of the pandemic. They're dealing with the financial impact of the pandemic. Some students even survived tornadoes during this time. There were some major challenges over the past 5 months. So we need to think long and hard about how do we identify any challenges and how do we get those students the treatment that they deserve.
Absolutely. I think you raised some interesting points, and this really throws the ball to Dr. Cormack, who is leading in one of our largest systems in the state as chief of staff, who has the task of thinking really operationally. What has this meant for your leadership, this new normal, if you will, Dr. Cormack?
Yeah, I very much appreciate the question. Our CFO, Ms. Miller, has coined the term the next normal because we are constantly in evolution. And so I think, to be quite honest, coronavirus kind of rocked our world in March. We were caught a little bit flat-footed. We were aware of what was happening, but certainly didn't realize all of the implications. And so we were building the plane literally as we were flying it. And we learned some really important lessons, and our team really marshaled together to really support, I think, what's inherent in this question, which is equity. We've tried to view things through an equity lens. And so one of the things that we did rather quickly was utilize and marshal some of our existing resources, like our instructional television unit. We are fortunate to have a Comcast cable channel, and we, in looking and surveying our population, oftentimes even families that didn't have broadband might have cable. And so we knew that we could stand up some instruction across the district through use of our instructional television team. And so our Office of Teaching and Learning, in partnership with teachers who were really interested in developing innovative lessons, set out lessons on television, and we made those available on YouTube. And so we really thought about what's the way that we can catch all of our learners from a variety of different standpoints. And we've learned a tremendous amount over the spring. And so I think the catchword for us is proactive planning. How can we make certain that when students, that we are adequately prepared and that we've run the traps and thought through a variety of different implications, so that we are planning in a proactive way to not have some of the same challenges. So what does that mean for teacher development over the summer? And what does that also mean about our students who don't do well with devices? So that's really led us to think about equity for our youngest learners. Thinking about pre-K, it's not a great idea to have a device in front of a 4-year-old for sustained periods. And so we're really thinking through what are some existing parts of our plan that we can enhance and take into a different kind of digital atmosphere, but then also rely on and help to train our parents up to support in the event that we should have a rolling closure, because we have to be prepared for all the traps. So it's proactive planning with an equity focused lens that I think is really going to guide us and is guiding our work.
Awesome, thank you. We have Dr. Searcy who is on as well. And I know things have looked very different from you. You're finding yourself, Dr. Searcy, giving folks lots of advice. What does this look like for someone who is instructing future nurses, working with current nurses? What has this meant for your leadership during this time?
As a nursing instructor, I've had to kind of alter the way that we've done things with our students as well. Our students had to adapt to a new way of doing things because we weren't online. So a lot of them faced the challenge of distance learning. Didn't work out for some of them it did, but we had to adapt so that to make things easier for them so that they could learn as well. The clinical component was a challenge for us, but we were able to simulate some things and help them out that way. And it actually was successful. What helped us also was keeping the lines of communication open so that they could communicate with us and tell us their challenges, and as well as respecting barriers, because we have adult learners. So sometimes they don't want to tell you things, and some things are going on at home that may affect the way that they learn and the way that we have to change things. So that was some challenges that we had to face and make some adaptations to what we were doing to help them.
Awesome. Dr. Crenshaw, would you talk a little bit about what this has meant for your leadership? You all have done lots of work with teens, and you were seeing how they are responding to this right now. What has this meant for your work?
Sure. So as a former educator and now being in the role of Director of Education for an organization focused on teen health related issues, the key element that I've learned across the board is that we really have to be in constant dialogue with our young people, and not simply thinking of young people as recipients of information, but really as co-creators. Youth right now deserve a really big seat at the table when helping us figure this out, because oftentimes they have their finger on the pulse of the community, and they're able to know who has access to information and resources, who has the connections, even more so than adults have. So I really want to challenge the people who are administrators to think about bringing in your student council members or hosting a meeting with them. Have you done a survey with your student body? I've seen a lot of surveys for parents out there, but what about our students? What are our students saying? Oftentimes they can tell you what students are struggling, what students are experiencing difficult times, who has the internet. So think about how we can amplify the voices of youth at this time. Right now, I have 2 youth board members who are my boss, who make sure that things are running okay at Teen Health, and we make sure that youth are partners in the work that we do. And so this is my challenge to school districts as well.
Awesome, thank you so much. And Dr. Hammond, as a superintendent as well, what has this meant for you and your leadership?
Thank you, Mr. Moss. First, let me thank Dr. Wright for her exceptional leadership during this pandemic. as well as Dr. Coleman for leading our work group. I think we have to rethink the way we educate our scholars. So our theme for the upcoming school year is transforming together. With that, our highest priority is to make sure every child has what he or she needs to be successful. What I share with my team is the quality of education in our district has to be the same or just as great as it is in Ocean Springs. So not only do we have to make sure we're providing quality online learning, we also have to make sure effective teaching is taking place in our classroom. So part of that is providing adequate training and support to our teachers. What we're doing is working with neighboring districts to provide summer PD. We're about to start in next month to make sure all of our teachers have what they need to start the school year. In addition, we also have to make sure our students have access to high quality instructional material. That's a concern of ours. So we've been working around the clock, particularly with our curriculum department, to make sure we have those resources available. But Mr. Moss, I think this pandemic has created a real opportunity for us to close the achievement gap, as well as an opportunity to make sure our scholars have what they need to be successful. So again, I would like to thank Dr. Wright for her leadership, as well as to encourage our friends at the state capitol to support her initiative with making sure all of our districts have access to devices and technology, because as we know, the pandemic isn't going anywhere anytime soon, and online learning is here to stay. So that's some of the things we're working on, and our goal is to make sure we're prepared for August.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I just want to drive this point home too, that, we may see another uptick in this. And so we need our legislative leaders to really support and put funding behind the plan that Dr. Wright has put forth to ensure that every child has a device and internet. There are a couple of questions in the chat around if they would be able to get have a actual internet access once they get a device. And so for this question that we have here, Dr. Wright is also going to talk a little bit about testing with this question, but it's also around academic needs. And so Dr. Coleman will start out here, but the question is, how should schools be planning to meet the academic needs of students when they return with regard to the 3 models MDE has offered? What is more, how should schools be thinking about making up learning loss? Do we start with grade level standards or teach prior year standards? Finally, how should teachers be engaged in this process? And so it's going to start with Dr. Coleman, Sanford. It's going to start with Dr. Coleman, and then Sanford Johnson will join us, Dr. Cormack, and then Dr. Wright will give us some thoughts here and also talk a little bit about state testing. We got a question emailed about state testing. We've seen folks talk about it in the chat. And our state chief will address that in this. So starting with Dr. Coleman.
Sure. Just in terms of the planning, I think all of us are probably doing more work this summer than we ever have before. I think we can clearly say that for the administrative bodies in the state. I can speak specifically to my district. We have 4 different reopening plans, and each one of those plans has a comprehensive framework from the instructional design all the way down to the academic expectations of teachers, parents, as well as students, all the way on the other side of the house to the budgetary restrictions, but also the funding mechanisms that we would use to fund each plan. Everything right now is very fluid for all administrators. And so I guess I always get a little worried when I hear this one size fits all, we're going to do this in the fall, because I don't think any of us truly know what the fall, even though it's just 2 months away, will actually look like. And so we have to be flexible, have those plans in place so that we can really start to address the gaps. In terms of learning loss, I think all of us understand the strong need for a diagnostic assessment that can be administered as soon as students come back into the buildings or even online in the fall, so that we can assess what we need to do in terms of addressing those losses, if there are losses. On the flip side, because of the way that our standards are actually structured in the state of Mississippi, when I've looked at our instructional plans, I don't see us spending a lot of time with remediation. I see a lot more acceleration, really addressing the power standards, as you will, in each one of those grades, and making sure that we are accelerating that learning even through extended day or whatever that will look like for us. We're also trying to make sure we're using this summer months to also address any of those academic deficits. And so we've tried to make the summer, the visioning boards that we're rolling out every week, we're trying to make those fun, but at the same time, we're also addressing those standards that students are going to need in order to be successful at the next level. In terms of just trying to make sure that teachers are prepared, a lot of the training right now for all of us, I know that's going on, is virtual. And I will say this, my secondary teachers did not struggle as much because they had been in that environment for a while. My elementary teachers, just because of, you know, pedagogy of teaching elementary, it was a huge shift for them. And so now, but I do think going through the pandemic, they truly see the importance and the relevance of how they can infuse technology into the elementary grades. Our priority is to make sure we're going to try and bring our elementary students back into the building, hold them static so that we can do contact tracing, but we need that face-to-face time. And if we have to depopulate for social distancing at the middle or at the high school level, we have a plan that we'll put into play for those students as well to keep synchronous learning, but we'll use some different types of devices. But all of those plans have to really be fleshed out this summer so that regardless of what happens on August 5th, we're ready. We want to go back in a traditional model, but we have to be ready if that cannot happen.
Yeah, I think we have Sanford who's joining us for the next part of this conversation. Sanford, you're hearing from teachers. What are teachers really wanting? How do they really want to be engaged in this? Would love to hear your thoughts around this.
Yes, so just to give a little bit of more information about the fellowship that we've started, we have 20 teachers who come from all around the state. 15 of those teachers are from the Mississippi Delta, which I'm really excited about. In the conversations that we're having with them, we're getting ready for the working groups that they're going to be a part of in the fall. And we don't exactly know what issues they're going to work on specifically, but I foresee the teachers working on policy recommendations around changing accountability and testing to fit this moment, to also take into account that students are going to come in with academic, social, and emotional challenges. It falls short of saying, let's get rid of testing altogether. We do understand that there has to be some form of testing going forward. I think if we've learned nothing else from this pandemic experience is that if you're not testing, you're just guessing. Essentially, like you have to test in order to find out who is infected, who needs treatment, and then you can also make community, state, and national policy decisions. And I think the importance of testing in an academic setting is very similar, to identify who has learning loss, who is actually still on track with current learning goals, what decisions need to be made at the classroom level, at the school level, at the district level, at the state level. So I hope that even if we need to make amendments to testing and accountability, we hope that the process will continue. And then I would close on this question by saying that we're really excited to have teachers involved in these conversations. And it's important to make sure that teachers continue to be informed, because teachers are your best communicators when it comes down to parents and communities. Great teachers are trusted regardless of the district. So whenever new information is being shared, not just from MDE, but from the school district, we need to make sure that teachers are the first people who are notified, because those are the people who are going to get the information out to parents.
Thank you so much. We can always count on Sanford to bring us a strong analogous statement to compare state testing to COVID-19 testing. I didn't know we would get there, but I really appreciate that. It really drove the thought home for me. Dr. Cormack, would love to hear you talk a little bit about this, how you all are thinking about this in JPS as well, and your thoughts around it.
So the three models from the MDE report are really helpful, but it's not, I believe, just a single track. I think we need to be prepared to run along parallel tracks. And so that's very much the conversation that we're having. To Dr. Coleman's point, blended learning for our high school scholars who are engaged in dual credit courses at Hines Community College for us, their transition was seamless. And so we want to support all scholars to make that same seamless transition, because our reality now is this move and push to one-to-one, and we need to be prepared. And so our virtual summer school is offering us that opportunity. I would concur with the very important point that was made about our standards. Because of the cyclical nature, specifically of both the math and the reading standards, we cannot intervene our way to success. We're not going to be able to successfully flip the RTI pyramid unless we offer high quality tier 1 instruction. And so for us, it's really meant some very intentional decisions about high quality instructional materials, and then providing teachers the supports that they need to be effective, so that we raise the bar for all learners. Because the reality is we cannot push grade level standards unless students are reading grade level texts and reading texts that expand their knowledge. And so that really will be the focus. And the RTI and the intervention supports will buttress that, but we got to make certain that students aren't being pulled from that core instructional material in order to get it. And so I think that that's really vital. Our virtual summer school is offering us the opportunity, I think, to run some of the traps and see how these things work, and for teachers to build the skills and the muscle to support it in the other grade levels, in the lower grades, in elementary and our middle school classrooms. And I think one of our priorities for the CARES funding is this shift to digital textbooks, because again, students who become familiar in the classroom setting with utilizing digital textbooks, with the facility, with technology, will be able to make that seamless transition should we have a rolling closure. So it's a both and strategy. As we've engaged our parents and families, one of the big questions that they have for us is, will there be an option for those who are not ready to come back into the building? And I think that that's vital, that as district and systems leaders, we offer that options to our parents and families, and that they be robust and that they be equitable options, and high quality options for folks that want to engage fully in the online setting. And I think it actually helps to support our abilities to social distance in buildings for those parents that want them back and need them back in buildings. And so it's a both and strategy. We have to pursue those parallel tracks. And I think our summer offers us a rich opportunity to learn.
Thank you so much, Dr. Cormack. Dr. Wright, I'm not going to stand in your way. When we talk about academics, I know that is your thing. So we'd love to hear your take on this, and also address some of the concerns around testing. And I really want to hear you. I love to hear you explain how we should be thinking about state standards and being committed to teaching grade level content. So have at it.
All right, well, you read my mind, so let me get started. So first I want to say I really want to echo all the comments that have been made, very thoughtful and very much on point. You know, and all three of those models, and I was glad that Dr. Cormack mentioned, it's not just a one only. There can be a combination of those used, and I think it's really based on the needs of the community. The one thing I want to bring up, and to me, people that know me, I'll always use the term language matters. And so I am going to encourage people to not use the term learning loss or being behind, because I don't want children to feel that they are being blamed for not being where we want them ultimately to be. So I'm glad to hear Benita use the term acceleration, because that's the term I'm using. We need to be accelerating learning, and I am going to, somebody coined a phrase the other day on a call that I was on, they're calling it unfinished learning. So it's a way to think like it's not blaming children and it's not blaming teachers. Start with the grade level standards. Dr. Coleman is exactly right. Remediation, there's years and years and years of research that remediation does not work. So our state standards are designed in a way that they build upon each other very quickly. And if starting with state standards, then you start with the grade level standards of which the children are currently in. Now, as you're teaching those standards, teachers are going to know pretty soon what other standards students may have missed, and those can be added into the core instruction that Dr. Cormack so eloquently talked about. Improving the core instruction for children is absolutely critical. So I told my Teachers Advisory Council, I meet with them on a regular basis. It's well over 200 teachers from across the state. Teachers have got to be engaged in this process. That is one thing that I've done very thoughtfully since I've been here as a state superintendent. There's not a thing that MDE is involved in that teachers are not involved in. So teachers have got to be involved. But I'm encouraging you to think about starting with the grade level standards and then supplementing from there. State testing, as far as we know, and in all of our communication from the United States Department of Ed, they are not entertaining at this point any waivers for state testing. State testing is required by federal law. And the only way that any of the states got that waived was when the Department of Education granted the waivers because of the COVID-19. They're in conversations that have been held, there, to quote someone, there's really no appetite at this point to consider waiving state standards. And I'm really glad that Sanford brought that up. We've got to test in order to know what children know and what they need to continue to learn. And part of that is done through, obviously, your benchmark testing that is done at the local level, but we also use the data from our statewide assessments to guide all the professional development that we do for our teachers around the state. So it's got to be a combination of all of the above. So at this point, we are going to proceed as if there will be state testing and accountability, and we'll have to just see exactly what the year holds, but that is where we are for right now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wright, for addressing that question. We had gotten it in an email. I saw it in the chat a couple of times. We're going to move to question 3, which is interesting because we just had a conversation happening in the chat around this very notion that both teachers and students have experienced a great deal of trauma as a result of this experience. Not to mention to the trauma students and staff experienced prior to COVID-19. How should leaders be thinking about supporting students and staff socially and emotionally? What systems and supports are out there to support school leaders? I believe this question, we start with Dr. Crenshaw, and then I believe Dr. Coleman joins us. But Dr. Crenshaw, would you lean in here?
Sure, and I really want to set the frame here. So in April, Teen Health Mississippi started a COVID emergency relief fund for young people with the help of the Women's Foundation and Jack Dorsey, who's the co-founder of Twitter. So we thought we'd see a few hundred cases of youth who need support, but what we have received to date are 4,000 applications for assistance. These youth have come from all 82 counties in the state of Mississippi and 122 towns and cities in Mississippi. And some of the things we're seeing happen to be that 63% of these youth are experiencing chronic or episodic food insecurities. 41% indicated that they were experiencing homelessness, whether that was couch surfing or indeed homelessness, being out on the street. 13.3% of youth were not able to get proper PPEs like gloves or masks. And many of these young people were struggling to get medicines, which included treatments for conditions like lupus, diabetes, a way to travel to and from doctor's appointments because they're living with HIV or AIDS, and even cancer. So again, these were all youth between the ages of 13 to 21. We're really in crisis mode here. Some of our youth have had part-time jobs at McDonald's to maybe pay for college coming up or for cell phones, and now they're the primary breadwinners in their household. It's not simply a matter of inconvenience for young people. It's really a matter of life and health for these young people. So we know that when youth don't have those basic necessities, they still need to get them some way. And so many youth have participated in, unfortunately, survival sex or sex for basic necessities. They are oftentimes at greater risk of being trafficked and other factors. And so it's going to be really important here for not only teachers, but parents, for school leaders to be trained on trauma. In reality, COVID is a form of trauma, and it has to be a long-term plan. So I really encourage school districts to link up with organizations like Teen Health Mississippi. We're really working to beef up our trauma support. We're pulling all of our trauma pieces to make sure that we have a package, and we're going to extend some recommendations within the upcoming weeks. But it's going to really be important here to make sure that teachers who are also experiencing their level of trauma have the information to support others who are dealing with trauma as well.
Dr. Crenshaw, I just want to extend that a little bit, and then we'll go to Dr. Hammond. Do you know any resources that are already out there for school districts? They are writing those plans now. Where might they go? Or any other panelists, Dr. Wright, anyone want to join in, where they can pick up a package training? I know it's not that simple, but are there any training and support pieces out there that exist for schools to be able to pick up and use for teachers?
The national organization, CASEL, has an unbelievable website. And I would strongly encourage anybody to go to that website. They've got all kinds of resources available to address social and emotional learning. And also we are planning on professional development for our teachers around how to embed social emotional learning skills, if you will, or to address those needs while teachers are teaching. So that is that organization really leads the nation in this work, and that would be the first place that I would direct anybody that's looking for those kinds of resources.
Dr. Crenshaw, did you want to add to that? And then we'll go to Dr. Hammett for a response on this question.
Yeah, so I would definitely say teen health is going to be one of those ones that already has trauma. It's not like trauma just arrived on the scene. Trauma has been around, and this is compacted, this is elevated trauma that we're seeing. So you also have national organizations like NAMI who can support. You also have Canopy, which is in the Jackson area and is regionally as well. So reaching out to those local support systems that can help out as well is going to be really key and really vital. The thing about it is we can go to national organizations, but do they really understand our context? The context of youth in the state of Mississippi. So I would advise leaning into those local contexts as well as in addition to those national contexts as well.
Okay, and I think as a former high school counselor, social and emotional support is going to be critical as we plan and prepare for the upcoming school year. I would encourage all school leaders to start creating systems to support their staff and scholars. Leaders should also create a safe place for their scholars and employees to talk through their fears. What we're doing in our district, we've created surveys for our employees as well as our students, but we're also trying to better train our counselors. We know that our counselors are going to play an important role when school reopen. We're also working to embed social and emotional learning in what we do every day. I think we have to take a holistic approach of educating our kids. We know that a lot of them are dealing with a lot of issues outside of the school setting. So it's going to be important to really reach our kids. We also have to provide this social and emotional support. Part of that is building quality and healthy relationships, not only with our students, but also our staff. What we're doing is getting our counselors prepared. We're glad that MDE has long moved from utilizing counselors for paperwork and things of testing. Now they can really support our students. We know once these kids enter our schools, whether it's virtually or in a classroom, they're going to need that social and emotional support. So right now, our whole plan is to train our counselors, but also provide professional development for our teachers.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. Coleman, what systems are you all putting in place, or you might have already dealt with some of this with having staff returning back? I would love to hear you talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, I think for us, but I guess even because of where we live, dealing with hurricanes, for us, trauma is something that is always in the forefront of our minds. And we have set up, working with our mental health, of course, partners, employee assistance. I would strongly encourage school districts to make sure we have those mechanisms in place so that if employees have concerns, they of course have a way to receive the help that they need. But in addition, making sure that there's one point person on every campus who is also the person who is coordinating those efforts. And that may be a counselor, it may be an assistant principal, but making sure that we have not only a social emotional curriculum, but at the same time that information and all of those tenets are built into the curriculum of the school, and all teachers and counselors and everyone understands that. It's been very important for that to also be culturally responsive. And I don't think we can leave those words out of this conversation, because it's not a one size fits all cookie cutter buy program and just implement it, because everyone's needs, especially when we come to this particular piece of the work, is very, very different. So from our gifted students to our students who have special needs to our students who are, we wouldn't necessarily think would have a trigger or a flag, those are the students that everyone needs to be paying attention to, especially as we bring them back into school. One thing that I continue to recognize is that school is a safe place for a lot of my students. We provide the safe haven. And when that was taken from them, the fourth quarter, we have to make sure that we go back into that acclimation process and provide the support that they need so that they can feel safe again. Because not all of our students come to us from the same Leave It to Beaver environment. We are the safe keepers for them. And so they need to know that they have that level of support and that it is continual regardless of the format that we're working in terms of a schedule.
Awesome. I want to bring Dr. Lorona Searcy into this conversation to really think about this as a health professional, and then talk about additional resources that are out there to be able to support students and teachers who have experienced trauma in some way.
Okay. I would like to address it as a parent as well, because I'm a parent of a 16-year-old, and I've noticed my child and her friends, some children may feel safe going back to school and it may be a safe place for them, but some of them are terrified. They don't want to go back because they're afraid of, they don't know how safe the environment will be for them. So something needs to be put in place for these children to feel safe. And when they don't feel safe, then what can be done for them in those cases? Like, will they be, will the attendance policy be lenient so that they won't be required to go to classes in person? Will they still be able to keep up with their work? Will they receive help virtually? How will that be handled? I guess those are some questions that I have as a parent. But I think that I've heard some things spoken as far as counseling being put in place, and that is definitely necessary because of the anxiety level. Those children will not function well in school if their anxiety is high. So you're going to run into some problems with children not being able to learn because they're anxious. And also, when you look at the children, some of them may want to wear masks, some won't wear masks. You look at the bullying, and then you look at what's being done in those cases, because bullying is not under control as it is. So then you have increased bullying and this kind of thing going on. So there needs to be some support put in place for staff as well as children and parents. And in those cases, you may just kind of need some extra eyes to kind of observe some things.
Thank you so much, Dr. Searcy. Would any of our other panelists like to tackle this question? I just want to name, I can only imagine the additional compounded trauma that boys who share my identity, who face inside of schools, given what's going on in this nation. And so not only do we need to think about the health virus that exists, but also the racial virus that exists and what's happening. And so how do we not only help teachers be trauma informed, but also we develop anti-racist teachers in this climate as well. And so those are all things that we need to be thinking about, because those are forms of trauma as well that are associated with. Would anyone else like to add to this conversation before we move to our next question?
Yeah, I'll chime in here. I think an important place to start is with the adults in the summer prior to students returning. If the adults are not well cared for, if their social and emotional learning and supports are not dealt with, if their trauma is not processed, then they can't be emotional role models and or supports for our students. So it starts with us. One of the things that we did as we rolled out a social and emotional learning program is that social and emotional learning is for everybody with a face. And it starts with the adults. And that's inclusive of teachers, but that's also the bus drivers, it's the custodial workers, it's the cafeteria workers, it's everybody that has a role in shaping and influencing the lives of children on campus. So that's first and primary. And a lot of our summer professional development has been geared toward really acculturating the adults to what are your own needs. Before we start any faculty meetings or any senior leadership team meetings that I lead, we start by just checking in with one another, because we're going through a lot. We're a little bit anxious. Sanford shared his struggles, balancing work and parenthood. We're all experiencing this trauma together. And if we don't create space for one another to be human and to touch base with one another, then we won't be any good for our scholars when they come back. So I think that's essential and primary to the work, is tending ourselves so that we can be better emotional supports for our scholars once they return. And it starts with us.
If I can add one thing to that, I would also say that we should give a lot of thought into what classroom management, what school discipline looks like. Just recognizing that students are dealing with a lot of trauma, and that may present itself in different ways when we get into the classroom. So we need to really think long and hard about what discipline looks like beyond or outside of in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, expulsion. We don't need to punish students for all the trauma that they've had to deal with and all the negative experiences that they've had over the past couple of months.
You know, one of the other, go ahead, Dr. Wright. I apologize.
One other thing I was going to say is I couldn't agree more. Children are very, very intuitive, and they're going to look to the adults and get the read from the adults as to how they're feeling. And if we can ensure that our teachers are feeling supported and secure and relieve them of the fears or anxieties or trauma that they're bringing into the building, that's going to mean an awful lot for children, because children will sense that. And if teachers are feeling confident and they're feeling like they're supported, then I think that that's going to go a long way to helping children feel more comfortable and creating that positive, warm classroom environment and school environment is so huge, because Dr. Coleman said it, for some children, this is the absolute safest place that they come to every day. And so they need to know that they're loved, they're cared for, and they're missed. There have been school systems across the nation, and this is another suggestion that we've tossed out, that have literally set up a call, assigned every adult in the district and in each building, a set of 5 to 8 kids. And every day, that adult, whether it's the bus driver, whether it's the custodian, whether it is the counselor, the classroom teacher, the assistant, is responsible for touching that child, either via phone call if they're not there to find out why they're not there, or stopping by a classroom, checking in. There's all kinds of ways, because if you don't feel that you're seen, then that sets in its own set of trauma as well. So I would encourage us to be thinking about how do we do that, and how do we do that in a way that is that creates that kind of environment where children are feeling very secure, adults are feeling secure, so that learning really can take place.
Yeah, I really appreciate all the comments here, and I'm going to wove my thinking into this next question around communication, and Dr. Coleman is going to lead here. Yesterday, I had a group of folks who reached out to me from an organization called Alert Trace, and they were talking about contact tracing, and this is so important. And I'd love for you all to as districts, think about contact tracing. I think there's a set of trauma, there's a set of fear associated with having been in the space with someone, and as much as we can, build communication protocols and build systems for communicating when there's been a positive case in our schools. So I'd love Dr. Coleman to start this out, Dr. Hammett, who led the portion of the work group focused on communication, to really help us think through, what does communication look like? And then just want to give the folks in the chat some forwardness. We will talk about operations in just a moment. I've seen lots of questions around transportation and all of those things. We will talk about that in just a moment. But Dr. Coleman, contact tracing, communication, the guidance document gives us some advice in the area, but would love for you to hear you talk about how you're dealing with communication right now, contact tracing, and all of those things.
Yeah, I'm living it right now. As a matter of fact, it's hit the media that I've had a student who tested positive, and one of our athletes, as we came back into athletic conditioning. I will say that our local hospital has been phenomenal in terms of helping us, because we're not medical doctors, but I now have a medical advisory council of doctors who are helping us with this work through their own volunteer efforts. Contact tracing has been interesting because we've had to contact parents and those students and literally try to walk back through their last week to figure out what groups of students they had been around, how we could make sure we were informing them. We now have a district response team with letters that have already been built, because we found that was going to be something that needed to happen very quickly, and we didn't need to have to wait for the letter to be populated. So we have, like, letter A means that you've been around a positive person, or letter B meaning that you have actually gone through the process of contact tracing, and we know that there's increased exposure. And so building all of those communication protocols this summer, while we have a small group of students as opposed to the entire thousands that we'll serve in August has been really helpful. The other thing is communicating with our parents has been on the forefront of our minds this summer, as well as communicating with our teachers. We're pretty, I will say the communication is one of the things that I hold dear in my district in terms of being a superintendent. We tried to make sure that we set up a health alert page and that teachers received information from me every week as we went through the spring cycle, and now they receive information from me on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, depending upon what the need is. Same thing with parents, using videos this summer to really walk them through some of the things that we're thinking, but also to try and alleviate some of the fears. So we've also started to have conversations about what transportation may look like, what are our options, what the building sanitation process will be, because that's important. But one of the other things that I've seen in the chat box is that we've also committed as a district that if you are fearful or you have a compromised immune system, we're going to continue to provide that parallel track for you virtually. Because we understand that we don't want students to feel as though, or parents to feel as though they have to withdraw their students and go into a homeschool environment, as opposed to us continuing to provide instruction. So communication, we have to overly communicate right now. And using all different sorts of mediums. It can't just be the letter that goes out. It has to be in multiple ways and in multiple formats, because you're only at this point as good as the communication that people actually read, they interpret, and they follow through. And they should be guaranteed certain levels of communication from the district without seeing that information in the press first. They should always hear from us first.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I have watched, and Dr. Coleman, you have a question in the chat. Folks are curious to get access to that beautiful letter that you and your team have constructed around contact tracing. So there's a question in the chat in that regard. Dr. Hammond, would you share a little bit about the considerations that Dr. Wright and her team at MDE put out that you all gave them guidance around? And Dr. Wright will be answering this question a little bit later too around communication, but would love to hear the thinking behind the work group and what advice do you give to school leaders, teachers, and principals as they are thinking about building their plans for reopening schools?
Sure. As we all know, effective communication is going to be key as we plan and prepare to reopen our schools. We've done a lot of work in our district. One thing we encourage school districts to do, whether you're large or small, is to create a communication team to kind of help with your messaging and to make sure you're responding to your stakeholders in a timely manner. We also encourage districts to look at multiple outlets to communicate with your stakeholders, whether that's social media, whether that's email, whether you set up a hotline. In our district, we created an email address called the Jefferson County Support Line. And what we're trying to do is channel all of our questions and concerns in one location. We also encourage districts to create a community task force to not only help with your reopening options, but to also share information to your community stakeholders. As we know, there's a lot of misinformation out there, so these individuals can be great ambassadors for your district. We also encourage superintendents to collaborate and communicate with their neighboring superintendents, particularly those in their region. What we're doing in Southwest Mississippi in particular, we're trying to make sure that we're kind of following the same protocols, that we're putting things in place to help build support in our region. One important key is going to be training your staff, particularly your front office staff. We encourage that you go ahead and start that process if you haven't already. We know that they're going to be receiving a lot of phone calls, and you want to make sure that they're communicating the same thing. In addition, we encourage school districts to look at the way that they communicate with parents. We ask if you're going to make decisions, try to get that information out to parents in particular within 48 to 72 hours. As we know, parents hate for things to be thrown upon them. So make sure you take that in consideration as you make those decisions. What we're finding out in my district is they're okay with the decision we make, but they want to be part of that process. So we've asked our parents to give feedback using surveys. We've asked them to call and let us know their concerns, and we want to make sure we address those as we plan to reopen our schools. So again, effective communication is going to be key in making sure you have a successful reopening plan.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Sanford, how are teachers, you've been working with teachers, how do they want their leaders communicating with them? What are some best practices that you are hearing from teachers? I'm sure Dr. Wright will address this as well from her Teacher Advisory Council. I'm sure they communicate with her about good communication and bad communication. So if Sanford and Dr. Wright on this last part of the communication question, if you'll address that for us, but Sanford and then Dr. Wright.
So that was one of the questions that we did ask on the survey. And it turns out that 83% of the teachers felt like they were getting effective communication. The one thing that we're not sure about is when they talk about communication, does that mean communication from the school, from the district, or does that mean like they're hearing about the impact of COVID on the news? So I think going back to what I said earlier, I think we should do everything we can to make sure that teachers are informed early and often when it comes down to policy changes related to returning to school, because these are the teachers are going to be the ones who are going to tell parents, who are going to tell students, they're going to get the information out in the public. So I'll just leave it at that.
Dr. Wright?
Yes, so a couple of things. I do believe I couldn't say more than absolutely over communicate. I am a firm believer in over communicating. I've said to people, about sending messages, I said, you can always hit the delete key if it's something that you don't really need, but over communication is powerful. I started a teacher's listserv this past year, and I now have the ability to send communication directly to all teachers. And I cannot tell you the positive feedback I've gotten from teachers about that. So we use that listserv. I do use my Teacher Advisory Council a lot. And when I met with them recently, many of them said, yep, they knew everything that was going on. And then there were a few that said, no, they really didn't know what was going on. And it was really very frustrating to them to kind of not know like next steps from the districts. But as a State Department, the one thing that we have done too is we've really used social media a lot more than we have in the past. And I also use our Facebook page. We post a lot of information on our Facebook page. We have set up on our website a special designation for all information related to COVID. We also just launched a brand new Strong Readers, Strong Leaders website. One you can access directly from our website, and it is for parents to be able to click on whatever grade their child is on, whatever their subject that they might be interested in. And then there's all kinds of resources for parents to help children at home. And so that has been, we've gotten a lot of feedback on that. I also have been sending out a daily update to all the superintendents because I think it's important that I communicate with them on a regular basis. So as information is coming in, we make sure that that's in our daily update. And as we get resources, we started primarily with just resources that were for free. We did not want to add any additional burden to districts. So we have been posting all of that on our daily update to superintendents. And also we've got on our website an FAQ document. So as questions start coming in, we're trying to group them into those content areas and then post those on our website as well. So I just don't think you can over communicate enough in a time like this, because the more information people have, the more they're going to feel comfortable with decisions that are being made. And also they can give you information and input in decisions that you've got to make. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I appreciate you all saying those things. I think one of I've read lots of stuff about how districts are communicating, and I really want to hang my hat on this point that Dr. Wright says about having a landing page really focused on COVID-19 update. It's really important that people can go to the same place every day, every minute, every week, every month, and get information from the same place. You don't want people to have to be searching all over to be able to do that. I've just read that in so many places. One of the things I also saw in the chat that one of our former superintendents in the state, Dr. Watkins, just brought up was this notion of P16 councils that are inclusive of lots of folks. So districts, as you're thinking about communicating, it might be good to lean into your P16 councils and get them functioning. We have university partners that we could lean in and help us with connecting across our communities. But I'll move the conversation if no one else.
Felton, I just have one more thing to say. And I think Adrian brought it up. Every superintendent in this state should have a communications team, a communications director, even if it's just one person that can help with the communications, because I can tell you that is such a powerful way to be able to constantly be pushing information out, because superintendents are busy enough as it is. So you really need somebody that you can delegate that to. I've got, I think, the world's best communication team ever, and they are very helpful in being able to push the information out that that we get. So if you don't have someone, if a superintendents are on the line, if you don't have a communications person, please find at least one person to designate that role to ensure that it gets done.
Yeah, and we got some media friends who are in the chat saying, please put your communications person's email and phone number on your website so that the local media will know who to contact. So help our friends out in the media as they are trying to get information out to folks. Our fifth question is really around health and wellness. Health professionals are strongly encouraging schools to follow the science with regard to opening schools. We've seen a great deal of things floating around the internet. What are some practices driven by science schools should implement as they open schools? What are the best practices for reducing transmission? What systems have you seen work over the last few months? Some of you brought football players back and other sports back. What's working? I believe Dr. Searcy will begin this conversation with kind of guiding us around the science of this. Then Dr. Crenshaw will come. Then Dr. Cormack will talk a little bit about work they've been doing. JPS has been feeding a lot of kids, but they put all these systems in place to deal with being able to ensure transmission is down and we're not transmitting the virus. And then our state chief will come and give advice. She has been working with Dr. Dobbs and other leaders and can provide some direction and guidance in that regard. I've seen across the chat, folks are asking, well, what is the science saying about this? So Dr. Searcy, Dr. Crenshaw, Dr. Cormack, and Dr. Wright, and I won't cut any of you off. We'll just go in that order.
Okay, the thing that I've heard consistently that works is social distancing, hand washing, and social distancing, hand washing. Those things work consistently. So those are things that have to be driven, have to be taught to the teachers as well as taught by the teachers. It has to be enforced. The things that I think that may pose a problem is the children social distancing. Children don't like to be away from each other. They like to touch, they like to share things, and those things cannot happen because that's going to pose a problem. I think that some things that should be done as far as preventing transmission is checking temperatures and cleaning the buses as they enter the buses. That they should be clean. In between routes, they should be clean. And on the buses, as far as social distancing, they really should not sit next to a pier and should not sit directly behind the pier. They should be staggered. So I don't know how you all will fix that situation, but it definitely is going to have to be addressed because there could possibly be some children that are at home and exposed to, like me, I'm a healthcare provider. My child lives with me. I may be exposed. So therefore she could be exposed. And if she goes to school and doesn't tell her peers that she's exposed, then this child is allowed to stay at school with her peers. So those kind of things need to be addressed as well. A lot of the things that I hear her being afraid of is her peers not being required to wear a mask. I don't know how you all are addressing that, if everybody's going to be required to wear one or not. But the fact that they aren't wearing one and she's wearing one and she's protecting herself, and so she has that kind of battle in her head. You know, is this something that I really want to do? Do I really want to go to school? I mean, it's not really an option. She has to go to school, but she wants to go to school safely. So the hand washing and the social distancing and the disinfecting, that kind of thing has to be addressed and addressed. It has to be strongly addressed in the schools. And checking temperatures, I think I said that previously, but checking temperatures upon arrival at school. And I know that you all have nurses in the schools, but the teachers as well need to be aware of what to look for, the symptoms to look for. When something is reported to them, they need to know that it's a symptom of COVID so that it can be addressed. That's all I have right now.
I completely agree with Dr. Searcy here. Everything you say, I completely echo it. I also want to throw out some resources here. The Fordham Institute has some opening plans, as well as CDC. And so here they talk about separating desks, the hybrid courses, keeping youth in one classroom. There are a lot of recommendations around there. And so I don't want to repeat the experts, but definitely go and check those places out. In addition, we need to think about teachers who may have underlying health conditions, and how do we keep those teachers safe? Teachers who may be dealing with high blood pressure or a range of other things who, what we're seeing from the news is that they're at higher risk of contracting COVID and having serious complications around that. So how are we keeping those places safe? But in reality, it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all model. And we've heard that before. We've heard that throughout this panel, and I think it really needs to be said again, is that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all matters. Schools are going to have to think about the size of the space that they have available. They're going to have to think about the number of students they have available, think about the internet resources and things like that. It's going to be a lot of work, but I think we're up to the task rather. I would say that about last week, we held a virtual youth conference with youth from Louisiana, Mississippi, and Tennessee. And so we used multi-modes to bring youth to the table. Some of them had their cell phones. We used Facebook and did Facebook Live. We used Zoom. Some people in Louisiana were actually social distancing in the same space. So I think we're just going to have to think widely and broadly about this, and just being very flexible is really going to be key here.
So I would echo many of the things that were said. I think the important point here is risk mitigation, right? We're not going to be able to eliminate all risk. We're going to have to socialize a level of risk. And the reality is that education is designed to be inherently a social exercise. And so social distancing almost kind of runs counter to the way that we, generally do business. So our next normal has to be about how we clean, we disinfect, we mask, we social distance, while collaborating in our reopening process to minimize risk, to mitigate some of the risk, and to have those decisions driven by science. If you're like me, you become kind of like an amateur epidemiologist. I've been reading a lot. And one of the networks that I'm a part of, they shared something from an actual epidemiologist talking about a tidbit about the reproduction number, which I thought was really vital. The reproduction number, or what they call R naught, lets us know what is the likelihood, or what in a community, for every one person that contracts COVID, how likely are they to transmit that to someone else? And so you're looking for that decimal number to fall under 1. Anytime it falls under 1 and is a low decimal number, it means that you're under a lower level of risk. You don't eliminate risk, but there's a lower level of risk. Where that reproduction number is 1, right? That means for every one person that contracts, they're giving it to someone else. And so that's something to watch out for, because it becomes a little bit more risky. And elevated risk, where we know where it will be very clear where we need to close schools, is when that reproductive number is greater than 1. And so one of the things that we need to lean on our county health officials, our health partners, is to socialize that number. We need to know our R naught. We need to know locally what is the reproductive number for COVID in Jackson, so that we can make responsible decisions. So just like the weather report, as ubiquitous as it is to know what the temperature is on the day, or the pollen count, you need to know your R naught locally, so that you can make decisions and we can inform the public and make our parents and families good consumers of that information. And that will ultimately help us to make smarter and wiser choices. I think as a learning organization, we also have to focus on how we teach folks around the health. So in addition to communicating the reproductive number, we've shot a video. Our Office of Climate and Wellness, our nurses unit, has done a fantastic job. Before we allowed our employees to come back into the office, those that have been working remotely, they watched an 8-minute video that had been composed locally by our nurses unit, which was incredibly helpful in synthesizing a lot of the health information. And it's amazing, as much as we're tapped into a variety of different information and touch points, just having a condensed video format that laid out the importance of hand washing, the friction that was required, cleanliness, the distancing, the face coverings, all of that in one video package, and modeled it with a spray bottle. The particulates that come out when we speak in close quarters to one another really help to crystallize some important messages. And the important step after that is, let's have a conversation about it. So let's get on a Zoom and talk to employees about what are your key takeaways? How are you going to implement the practices that were demonstrated and modeled in the organization? We know how to teach students, and we need to make certain that we're also socializing the adults about ways to engage responsibly. We can't take it for granted that adults won't break bad habits like, touching around handles and then not hand washing. So we have to create the next normal conditions, and instructional videos and those kinds of strategies are really helpful. For our students in previewing for the fall, we've got a number of school mascots, and there's a lot of school pride connected to our high schools. So we're actually, in a novel way, working with a firm to develop a video utilizing our mascots to demonstrate social distancing. And I think it'll be a fun way to engage our scholars around the kinds of habits that we want to begin to socialize once they come back to school, so they can engage in helpful ways that we can further our educational mission, but do so in a way that mitigates risk. We're not going to be able to eliminate risk, but we can mitigate risk by utilizing the science.
Thank you. What we have been doing, I've been working with Dr. Dobbs, who's our state health officer, and Dr. Byers, who's the state epidemiologist. So we have been literally in regular contact, sometimes as much as twice weekly. And Dr. Dobbs has also been on webinars with all of the superintendents across the state. There's another one scheduled for next week, actually. And he's going to be talking at the webinar next week. He's going to be addressing the issues around athletics, extracurricular activities, and overall safety and health. Things such as when someone contracts COVID, if it's a student, what are the next steps? If it's an adult, what are the next steps? So that superintendents can then share that information with their principals. I just was talking to him actually today, and he's very concerned about the future in Mississippi as far as COVID-19 is concerned. And I think his biggest level of frustration, to quote him, is that people are just not following the rules. You will walk into buildings or walk into stores and no one's wearing a mask. No one's social distancing. And just as Dr. Cormack just said, I mean, even if you've touched something, we take it for granted that we've touched it, but then what about the hand sanitizer? What about the washing of the hands? And so he's really sticking with just the basics at this point. He's saying, if you follow the CDC guidelines, and they're very explicit, and they're on their website about the reopening of schools and what schools should be thinking and doing at this point, using the state health department's guidelines, because those are on their website as well, and then stick with those things that they know are definitely working. Social distancing, hand washing, cleanliness of all flat areas. So that may mean that your custodians in schools are going to have to really be like on the ground 100% of the time, walking around the halls, walking into the bathrooms. If you've got stairs, cleaning the stair rails, with disinfectant, et cetera. Masks are also highly recommended. I know people are struggling with, well, how do we do this with little ones? And I know that that's going to be hard because it's not, as an adult wearing a mask for a long period of time, and I'm the one that is the adult, it's sometimes it's tough for me. So I can only imagine when you're looking at a 5-year-old and saying, well, sweetheart, we need you to keep your mask on. So I think in those cases, if we can social distance, then the mask may not be as burdensome as we would want them to be if we could practice the social distancing. So that's the information we have been pushing out to our superintendents and across our website. And that to me is the best guidance that I can give you. This is real. I can't say that enough. This is a real situation. I know, and it alarms me because that there are people out there that think that this is not real. This is real. And unfortunately, it's impacting people of color more than it's impacting anybody else. Any state's data that you look at, you're going to find people of color who are dying at a higher rate and who are contracting COVID-19 at a higher rate than any others. And so we've got to be cognizant of this. We have got to be making sure that we're doing the best that we can to help children and prevent this disease from spreading. But then if it is found, just like Dr. Coleman has been experiencing it, she jumped right on it, mobilized her team, and mobilized the community. So we've got to be vigilant about this. This is going to be with us for a long time, even with the vaccine, which is another 18 months-ish if we're lucky. You're gonna have to have that vaccine in large enough numbers to really overcome this. So you're probably looking at this for easily another 2 to 4 years is what people have said. So we've got to, Dr. Cormack's point, we've got to find out ways to mitigate it, because there's no way we're going to eliminate it at this point. So the best we can do is to be good stewards for our teachers and our families and our children.
Well, thank you so much. This is our last question. Folks, we have been our panelists have been watching the chat to see questions and try to respond to you in their responses. We had questions that were emailed in to us. This is going to be our last question. And then I will turn it over to our panelists, because we get out of here in 5 minutes, and see if they have any other closing remarks. I don't want to be like my old Pentecostal preacher and keep you over time. So we're going to get you all out with this last question. But Dr. Cormack will lead on this question. We'll hear from the two superintendents and then Dr. Wright. And then I'll say one other thing and turn it over to Senator Ford here to close us out for the night. But a great deal of planning will go into transportation, food services, maintenance services, athletics, and HR. How are you all thinking and planning around these services, and what are the biggest challenges, and how are you tackling them? So starting with Dr. Cormack, he serves with Dr. Green. Dr. Green's the superintendent. He's the chief of staff there. They're one of our largest systems. So it's best to hear from people who are tackling this at a very large scale first.
Yeah. We're fortunate. We've got a great operations team, but I think here the message is collaboration. You cannot have siloed work, operations as a division, without focusing on the academic side of the house, because all of those support services are just that. They're supports of the academic mission. So everybody needs to be at the table to engage in those conversations as we think about whether go to a blended or mixed model versus an online model. Those important decisions have to be made in tandem with our capacities to offer it. The CDC guidelines, let's think about that for a moment. For bus transportation, well over 90% of JPS scholars ride the bus, right? And so when you talk about the CDC guidelines and skipping every other seat, on a standard bus for 70 students, that means halving the capacity of that bus. So what does that mean in terms of the instructional day? Those are the kinds of things that we're having to think through in really concrete ways. And so part of that means, can we reach out to some of our parents and communicate with them that, hey, if you're able to and would be willing, can you drive your students to school? How many of you would be interested and are able and would like an online option so that we can have the capacity to social distance? And so those are all conversations that we're engaged in. The masking gives us opportunities to brand. And so here's my JPS mask and opportunities to do that. But then we also have to think through. So we're shopping a variety of projects. I've got this face shield. So though it looks very different, it may be a little bit more comfortable, and you can socialize anything. With little ones, it may be fun to play to be a space alien, right? And it allows us to see. One of the things that we learned with the face shields is that for our hearing impaired students and faculty, being able to read lips is a really important and integral skill. And we can't do that with masks. So how do we achieve the goal of containing the spread while also serving objectives? As a reading guy, right? It's important in those early grades, the foundational skills, that students be able to articulate the sounds. We need to be able to see their lips and their mouths. So there are a variety of things that we can think through, but we have to have all the key players at the table to kind of engage in smart ways about what are the dimensions of this, okay? So little ones can't keep on a mask. Maybe they might, be willing to do a face shield if we made it cool. Those are the kinds of conversations that we're engaging in, and it's a really coordinated piece. I'll also address HR because it's one of the teams that sits under the chief of staff in our district. We're having really intensive conversations about our staff members, the comorbidity of some of their existing health issues, and trying to think about ways and strategies to work remotely. What happens when people contract or someone in the home contracts COVID? And so we're looking at our family medical leave policies, because the reality is we need to think about our substitute budget and ways that we might supplement that as well. And so it's a very holistic approach, but COVID is impacting everything. And so we need everybody at the table to engage in collaborative conversations, because it will have some of these deep connections, and that proactive planning is so integral to being able to just consider what might be, recognizing that there are going to be some things that we miss, but having the right folks at the table is offering ourselves a little grace, but then also the space to fix it and fix it quickly.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Cormack. Dr. Coleman, would you chime in here and also talk a little bit about, we had an earlier conversation about folks who may be at retirement age and how districts should be thinking about that, and how it's on your mind as well.
Sure. When we talk about HR, one of the things that we've tried to be very considerate of is not only individuals who, according to CDC, are at greater risk because of the age of being 55 or older, but also underlying health conditions. And so there are some HIPAA violations that prevent us from asking certain questions, but certainly all of our HR departments can really run that report for us right now. And we can know the percentage of our staff who are 55 or older or at retirement age. Putting those surveys out, asking questions about do you intend to return will help us, of course, in terms of just prior planning. But I also think it's an opportunity if we have to go into a hybrid model or virtual model, that perhaps if we can already have in our minds that these are the groups of teachers and looking at their certifications and endorsements that perhaps could serve as the virtual educators and be in a very private and also safe environment. We've also talked from the maintenance side. We walked every building to figure out what our isolation room would be, because that was one of the recommendations that came from the CDC, that if a student or a staff person actually started to exhibit symptoms at the school, we needed to have a safe place for those individuals to wait that wouldn't expose them to other individuals. And then the sanitation of that room is also important. Even thinking about your visitor protocols. We're one of those districts where individuals like to come to the school and eat with children, especially grandparents, which we love that community support, but that might not be possible right now. I don't think it will be possible. And also thinking about decommissioning our cafeterias and using a menu at the beginning of the day and actually having to serve in the classroom, because if we're not able to have those large areas where students are able to gather, we still have to make sure food service provides their service as well. And I think the last thing that I just want to say is I had my superintendent student council today, and I was so impressed with the maturity level of my students, because one of the things that they said is we're looking at the governor's updates every day, and we're reading the science. And of course, the movie Contagion has kind of put all of us in a different place around this whole pandemic. But students really are, they understand the depths of this virus. They aren't taking it lightly. And they really want to come back into safe environments. And so figuring out how to depopulate schools so that we can socially distance, but at the same time provide very high quality instruction is something that our students are really, they are depending on us to do. And it's something that we need to be planning for this summer.
I think Dr. Hammond is next.
Okay. I think planning and training will be critical with this component, dealing with operations, identifying whether or not you have enough bus drivers to accommodate any changes to your bus routes, putting together a plan to address if you have any drivers to test positive for COVID-19, if you have any students to test positive for the virus. Also, if you're gonna check temperatures before students get on the bus, or if you're going to pre-screen, you've got to make sure your drivers have the proper training to do these type of things, and to make sure that it's consistent with all of your drivers. as it relates to the cafeteria, having a plan if you have to transition your meals to the classrooms, having a plan in place if you have any cafeteria workers to test positive for the virus. So planning and training will be critical. We're meeting daily with our team, particularly our leadership team, making sure we have things in place. One of the biggest challenge is getting supplies. As we know, it's a shortage everywhere. So we're just trying to make sure we have all of the supplies needed to make sure all of our employees, as well as our staff and students, are safe and can return to the district without any fears of not having what they need to be in a welcoming environment. So again, I think planning and training, because even if you plan and you don't train the proper way, then it's probably not going to work well. So in addition to planning, you also have to make sure you're training all of your staff.
I think the one thing that I would add, because I certainly concur with everything that's been stated, the one thing I might add, and Dr. Hammond kind of suggested it, is I would, if I were a district superintendent, I would have a communication feedback loop with all of my principals on a daily basis, whether it's a Zoom call every day at 4 o'clock or whatever, to find out what were some of the challenges that they're being faced, where did they find the best successes, what are some of the issues that they're facing either in the academic program or with operations. But I would schedule a daily feedback loop with all of my principals at least for at least the first full month of the conversation, because I think that's where you're going to be able to, and not wait necessarily for them to call into you, but to know that you're in communication with the leadership across the district, and then follow it back up either with an email the next day about here's things how we're going to handle it, here's how it's going to be addressed, you know, but you're at least then in that loop all the time about what's, and have a pulse on the district. And I know whether it's as large as Jackson or it's as small as some of the districts that we have, it really doesn't matter. It's that leadership matters at a time like this. And I can't emphasize that enough. Leadership matters. I had a book that was recommended to me, and I'm going to recommend it to all my superintendents, and it's called Leadership on the Line. And it's talking about leading in tough times. And it's the second edition of this book, but I cannot tell you how it's made my thinking change around how to be more adaptive as a leader. And I think this is a time that we all have to be a lot more adaptive, because something is going to change on a daily basis. And if we're not on top of it and we're not leading it, then shame on us, because our students are depending on it, our teachers are depending on it, our principals are depending on it, and our parents are depending on us to step up and be a leader at this time. And so that's the biggest piece of advice that I could give anybody that's listening tonight.
Well, I certainly want to thank all of our panelists, and certainly our State Chief, Dr. Wright, for joining us on the call. What she mentioned was Leadership on the Line by Ronald Heifetz. There are some Heifetz lovers around here. I happen to be one of them. So Dr. Cormack is throwing his hand up. I see Dr. Green in the chat saying yes to it as well. So get you some Heifetz in your life if you don't do anything else. But thankful to this group of panelists for engaging tonight. I'm heavy. I feel good. I'm motivated to go and tackle the issues tomorrow. But at this time, I want to turn it over to our visionary leader for the Legislative Black Caucus, Senator Angela Turner Ford, to close us out tonight.
Okay, can you all hear me? Mr. Moss, thank you so much for assembling our panelists this evening. You all have provided a wealth of information. Dr. Wright, we can't thank you enough for joining the call, for leading our state's educational needs. To each one of our panelists, I would have to say, as a legislator, as a parent, it gives me a lot of comfort to know that with all of the issues that are going on surrounding COVID-19, they're being given much thought by individuals who have various levels of expertise. And I can sense the care, and I'm just happy to know, I'm comforted to know that you all are applying your levels of skill and knowledge to addressing and tackling the issue of our safe return to schools. You all have shared information with each other, I believe. You've shared information with those who attended the call, and I think that we're all appreciative of that. As the chair of the Mississippi Legislative Black Caucus, please know that we are in place to listen, to hear the concerns of our constituents, to gather as much information as we can, and to try to legislate on their behalf. Certainly, we will keep our eye on these issues as they unfold, and we want to make sure that we are a voice for the community. So thank you all for your participation, and we look forward to engaging you all in the future. And at this time, we will end our call. Thank you.